Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new here. My name is Dani, and today I'm going to talk about all the books that I read in October. In October I read 5 novels, one graphic novel and one short story. So this is what my wrap-up basket looks like, and these are all the books that I'm going to talk about. So I'm going to go in the order that I read them. The first book that I read in October was The Invisible Life of Addie Larue by V. Schwab. This was my first book by V. Schwab, and I was very excited about it because all the hype. It's one of the most hyped books in the whole year, and I pre-ordered it because I wanted to read it as soon as possible, because I think that if I didn't read it as soon as possible, I would just leave it and never get to it. This is a story of Addie who makes a deal with a god in the beginning of the book, in which she's going to live forever, but she's going to be forgotten by everyone who sees her. So basically the person sees her, talks to her, and then immediately, if they turn away, they forget everything about her. And I gave this book 3.75 stars. I put 4 stars on Goodreads, but it was a little bit less than that for me. For me, the first half of the book was phenomenal. It was just so nice to read. It is a really sad book because V. Schwab she's not scared of taking this curse to some really dark places and really exploring what it means to be like Addie. And we go through a lot of history and just like what Addie's doing at that time, how she's reacting, what people were doing and all of that. So it was like the first half was fascinating for me. We meet a new character here that if you don't know a lot about it, I'm not going to tell you anymore because it might be interesting to go into it blind. But we meet a character here that I really loved him. He was, I adored him. He was a nice character, like a nice person, which I like to see. And we also see this god that she made a deal with from the beginning of the book. He appears throughout the whole story as well. So the issue for me here was that there's some things in the relationship between all these characters that I didn't think that's where the book was going to go, and I didn't like it. And there was also one specific decision in the end of the book related to this relationship that it's a trope. I don't know if it's a trope, but just like a decision that authors make sometimes in movies and books that I just really hate. The ending, the last chapter of the book, last few pages of the book, I also thought it was unnecessary. It felt like she was setting up for another book, which I don't think there's going to be. She said it's a standalone, but it's like, if it goes well, if I want to write another story, maybe I can now. So I think that last part was unnecessary. But overall, I think this is a phenomenal book that everyone will have feelings about. You will feel things for these characters and for the situations. And I definitely did. And I don't think I will forget Addie, but also it didn't work for me as well as I expected it would. And then after Addie, I tried to read Dune. I actually started before October started. I started reading Dune before October, but I just couldn't read it. It was just so hard. It was like the hardest thing that I ever tried to do in my reading life, and I just couldn't do it. I just couldn't pick up the book. So instead I picked something else that I was more interested to read, which was Locke and Key Volume 1 by Joe Hill and Gabriel Rodriguez. Locke and Key tells a story of this house called Key House, in which these children go to live after their father dies, and they go with their mom and with their uncle who lives there, if I'm not mistaken. But the thing is that this house has some weird doors and some weird keys that goes with the doors. So they start to find out about these doors and how they work and what they do. There's also some big evil thing that is here wanting some things related to these doors and these keys. They are also dealing with their father's death because he was killed by an old student of his, and we get a little bit of the backstory of how that happened and who is the guy that killed him and what's going on now. And if you haven't seen it, there's a Netflix show that the second and third season were already confirmed. There's only the first one out, and it's a lot of fun. I really like the TV show, but it's very YA, while this book, it still could be considered YA maybe because they're children's doing the stuff, but it's much creepier. It's much more gory. And if you watch a TV show and you wanted it to go a little bit further, maybe this will definitely be something that you will enjoy. But either way, I think they're different enough. I think it was a very good adaptation from just the first one that I read it. I'm going to read the second one in November. So I think they did a very good adaptation, because some things that happen in his book, it's harder to translate to TV because there's a lot of thought. One of the children here thinks a lot, and in the page it is just like a thought bubble. But in the TV show it would be weird. So I think they translated that in a way that really worked. So I really liked it, and I really want to continue the series, but I really, really want to finish this one as well. And I think they're both awesome, and I do recommend both of them. And then I decided to read a short story, which is The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. I had heard about this short story for the longest time, and I was super curious about it. And again, I didn't want to read Dune, so I was just postponing it with other things that interested me. And I got the ebook for the story. One thing that I didn't like, so before I tell you what the story is about, one thing that I didn't like in the ebook is that it's a public domain book, so there's a lot of information about what you can do with the file, like how you can share it and all that. So the story ended in 65% of the ebook, and the whole rest of it was just like, I don't know, terms and conditions of the ebook. So for me, it ended very suddenly, and I was not prepared for it to end because I was 65% in the story still. So it was a very short story. I really thought it would go farther than that, because just the 65% is like very, very short. But this is like a horror gothic short story about this woman who is having some mental health issues, and the people at this time, it was published in 1892. So the people at this time, the treatment for it was for her to be locked in this room, in this attic, and not have any influence from anything. So she couldn't read, she couldn't write, she couldn't draw, she couldn't do anything. She just has to stay there with her thoughts, which sounds like an awful thing to do for someone who's having like troubling thoughts. But this room has a yellow wallpaper that has this weird pattern to it. And I'm just gonna say that because, like I said, very, very short. But I do recommend it. I think it was not as scary as I thought it would be, but it was very creepy. So it's definitely a spooky reading if you're looking for that. I would definitely recommend in that sense. The ending, it was very sudden for me. So I don't know, I didn't get it at the time. I'm like, what's going on? Why is this over? But after thinking about it more, I really like how it ended. So I don't know. If you read it, let me know in the comments, because I'd love to chat about that ending. And those 3 things were all that I read until the half point of the month, because I had to read Dune. So I decided at that point that I would just finish Dune, and whatever, if I couldn't read anything else in the month, it was fine. So I just wanted to focus on Dune and get it over with. But let's talk about it. Dune is a book by Frank Herbert, published in 1965. And I was reading this for the Dune Along that I'm doing with Kelsey from Reading with Kelsey. I'm going to link her channel down in the description. And we're still deciding how to do the live show, because we wanted to talk about this book with all of you, because we invited all of you to read with us, and we wanted to talk about it. But we haven't set a date yet. So if you have any suggestions, if you finished the book also, let me know in the comments so we can set a date for this. But this is a very long book about the main character here is Paul Atreides. He's this 15-year-old boy who travels with his parents to the Dune planet, which is Arrakis. And they have been chosen to rule Arrakis by this other faction. I don't know if they're a different culture or what's going on. There's a lot that in the world that's not explained in this first book. I know that it goes further in the rest of the series. And from the beginning of the book, we know that there's people who don't like them there, and they don't want them to be there, the family of Paul Atreides. I think I'm trying to not say any spoilers, but from the beginning of the book, the author keeps throwing you these spoilers. So there's not a lot of surprising things that happen in this book because the author keeps telling you what everyone's thinking, what everyone's doing all the time. So there's no really big twist here. We already know who is going to betray who, what everyone is doing, and all of that. So it was not a very surprising read, positively, at least. It was very hard. The writing style did not work for me at all. I think it was dry and boring, and I feel like the main interesting things in the story were not shown to us. He just told us what happened in the most interesting parts and then moved on to something boring. The ending of the story, not gonna say any spoilers, but the ending of the story, I felt like it went to a complete fantasy aspect that I was not expecting. I'm confused why we're there now, because this is a very sci-fi heavy, and then in the end we're like, oh, this is magic. Not exactly magic, but it's really weird. Oh, this is heavy. It's just really weird how he explained all of that without the sci-fi stuff. And also, just one last thing that I didn't like about the book was that I felt like the female characters of the book were actually great characters. They were smart. They knew what they were doing. They were capable of doing all this stuff. But the author didn't give them time to do it or opportunities to do it. I felt like they were not used. It's already a bad word to say it, but they were not used to the extent that they could have been used. They were just in the sidelines, although they were very smart and they were some of the most important characters on the book, and they were not given the page time or the attention that they should. But I didn't hate the book. I think I understand why it's a very important book for our time and how it influenced a lot of new stories since then. I don't want to give it a rating right now. I didn't give it a rating on Goodreads because I don't think I read it as carefully as I should have, and I feel like I just rushed through it just to get it over with, and I don't think that it's fair to give a rating in this sense. So if I ever do reread this book, I will give a rating to it. Because if I do that right now, it would be a bad rating, which is fine to give bad ratings to books. But I want to make sure that I'm doing what the book deserves, if that makes sense. It might deserve a bad rating. I don't know. I think it did a lot of good things in the universe, especially in the way that he created this whole planet and all these cultures, and I am curious to see how this is going to be related to other things happening in the world in other books, but I'm not reading the other books right now. Yeah. So let me know if you read it, how you feel about it, because let's chat about the book. After finishing Dune, I could finally focus on the books from my m&ms TBR. So after that, I finished This Lie Will Kill You by Chelsea Pitcher. This is a story of these 5 teenagers. It's very Breakfast Club, like they have specific personalities. And they go to this house where they are promised to be entered in a competition to win a scholarship. But they soon realize that there's some weird stuff happening in this house and they don't know who invited them. And they are all related to this accident that happened 1 year ago. So we go back and forth. We get the story from what happened 1 year ago and right now. And this is another book that the first half was amazing for me, but probably because I didn't read it as it was intended to be read. I think it was very funny. Like the first half of it, it was so over the top, exaggerated. There's this boy who wants to be with a girl and they're in this creepy old house that no one knows why they're there, what's happening. And he's just thinking of going to bed with this girl in this room while people are like not dying necessarily, but like where all this stuff is happening. Like, this is so weird. It was very weird and in that way that like I thought it was a parody or something. So I think like for me was the first half was very entertaining in that way because it was just so funny. I didn't think it was spooky or creepy in any way. It was just funny. I was just having a lot of fun with it. The second half, I think it could have stayed that way if it wasn't for some decisions that the author made here. We start to get more about the story of the past, and I think that as we got more of that, the way the characters behaved in the present didn't make a lot of sense. I thought it was very inconsistent. And then there is also a lot of problematic stuff that appears in the second half of the book. No spoilers, I don't think that's a spoiler, but there is non-consensual sex that is not treated as rape or not dealt with at any point. There's also a very dangerous conversation, I feel like, especially for a YA book, about giving the man the benefit of the doubt, which I think it's written here in a way that it's, like I said, it's just very dangerous because well, not the author, but all the characters here are basically saying that if the man said he didn't do it, then people should believe him. And I think that was very problematic. And then that made the rating go all the way down because I didn't like the second half of the book at all. When we got to all that story, I'm like, that's no. So I don't think I would recommend this book necessarily. I was really hoping they would stay just in the lighthearted way that the first half was, even if it wasn't the intention. I think the intention was to be creepy and like a thriller. For me, it was just funny and entertaining. But then the second half, we went into too many stuff that I just couldn't. I just don't agree, and I don't think it was handled well. But if you read it and if you think that I missed something maybe on how this was handled and treated, just let me know and we'll chat about it. But I think it was weird. So in the end, this was like 2.5, 3 stars because of the first half, but I don't necessarily recommend this book, unfortunately. The next book I read was A Woman Alone by Nina Laurie. This was sent to me by the publisher, so thank you so much for sending this to me. This is a story of a couple who lives in this smart community, this smart neighborhood. There's a company in this world, like an enterprise, that created this whole community of houses, and there are like parks and all this stuff. They're all smart, so they all have sensors and they know how to give you exactly what you want. So for example, the coffee maker knows exactly the type of coffee she wants all the time. So it's a really, really interesting concept that I was very excited to read about. It reminded me a little bit of Turn the Key by Ruth Ware, but this one goes much, much further in the smart aspects of the house. And that's what starts the thriller thing here, because the AI that controls everything starts to behave, well, not necessarily the AI starts to behave, but she starts to not get exactly what she should get. Like her coffee is a different type of coffee, and she's like, why is this happening? And then it spirals out of control. She has a toddler also that it's a pain in the ass. This girl is a little demon. The main character does call her a little demon at some points, and that sometimes for me was a little bit too annoying because these are very bad parents. Her husband is basically never in the story, which is another like small issue. He's always working a lot because he thinks that's what they want, but he's just not there for her or for her child. So it's definitely a domestic thriller in that sense, and I really enjoyed it. I gave this 4 stars, and I think the resolution of it could have been better. I think it was too surface level, and it could have been gone deeper after we learned everything that happened. But it was still very much fun. Just a lot of fun. There's a lot of characters to be suspicious about, which I usually enjoy. But I think just my favorite part was definitely the way the house was behaving and how she was afraid of the house because of all the things that were not working as it should. That like haunted house aspect gave me, I just think it was a lot of fun. So I definitely do recommend if you're looking for something like that. And if you have more recommendations of thrillers about smart homes, I would love to check them out as well. And then the last book that I read in October was House of Salt and Sorrows by Erin A. Craig. This one came in our crate, and this is a retelling of The 12 Dancing Princesses, which is Brothers Grimm tale, if I'm not wrong. And I have the actual story, the 12 Princesses story, and another book that is right there. But I read that one before reading this. I didn't count that as something that I read in a month. It's like 6 pages. But before reading this, and I think it was interesting because I didn't remember that one very well. And I liked seeing the things that are related from that story to this book. But this one basically starts in the beginning of the story. There are 4 of the 12 sisters that are dead, and one of the oldest sisters starts to question if she really committed suicide or what happened for that last sister that died. And also there's a lot of mythology in this community. They live in this island, and it's all about the salt, and it's all about this gods of the sea and things like that. But they know that in the land they worship other gods. I really enjoyed it. I think it was creepier than I thought it would be. I don't know, I think that it was very well written in that part. But again, the ending. I'm having a lot of hard time with endings lately, but I think it didn't explain everything necessarily, or just gave very simple explanations to some of the things that seemed too important in the beginning of the book. So like, there's something that you think it's going to be big, and it's just like, oh, it's just that. What is actually big is the other thing that we didn't hear too much about in the beginning of the story. So I think I missed some of that for the ending of the book, just to wrap it all better, because it was wrapped in a way that made sense in the end. But I wanted a little bit more explanation, maybe more attention given to some of the things that seemed too important in the beginning of the book, or as the story went. But I also gave this one 4 stars, 3.5 4 stars, and I would definitely recommend it if you're looking. This is much better YA thriller than This Lie Will Kill You. So if you're looking for a YA spooky story, it's not necessarily a thriller, because she is trying to find out what happened to her sister that died, so there's a lot of thriller elements in that part, but there's a lot of paranormal stuff also in here. There's all this god and mythology stuff as well. So there is a lot here that I would definitely recommend it, and probably other people will like the ending more than I did. But it was still a great story. Those are all the books that I read in October. Let me know in the comments if you have read any of these, and if you have any recommendations for the things that I mentioned that I liked in each of these books. And remember to like this video and to subscribe to my channel, and thank you so much for joining me.